Pemina oedden ni, rei sy'n gwylod y chwarae, ac oedden ni'n dod i ffyrin yn aml, really, i pen. O mam yn deud paid yn mynd i'n pellach a Red Gables oedden ni'n alw fo. O'na tŷ mawr coch, ac neb yn mynd i'n pellach a Red Gables, oedden ni gyd o gyfer troi'n ôl wedyn pe oedden ni. Oedden ni chwarae'n coed, oedden ni swings raff, chi. Swingiau'r heini, sa bethau. O bob arall cam di pictures ond o'n i'n mynd. A bod mam i'n pres o dad yn yr armi. A wedyn, dyn oedd yn galad weithiau pan ni'n gweld lleill yn cael. Ac oedd y lleill cam di siop chips a fish bob nos Wener i gael. Ac o'n i'n cael. Ac o'n i'n gwisio amdano nhw tu allan. Wel, o'n i'n byw mewn stryd i lawr entry, ond oedd y cefnydd yn gret. O bob dod i lawr wedyn yn y cefnydd gyda'r nos. Ac oedd gynnu nhw hen record player a troi handle. Oedd o'n gret, oedd bobl i gyd o dyna i ganu ac i rwnsio bethau. Ac oedd gynnu ni perthnasa'n byw yn Manceinion. Ac oedd nhw'n gwybod sut i rwnsio'r dansys newydd yma. Ac oedd nhw'n dysgu bobl lawr. Yr ha, gwylio'r ha, oedden ni'n mynd i lawr la môr 9 o gloch, bob dydd, aros yn la môr trwy dydd. Wedyn oedd y Saeson yn dod yn ei ceir a parcio, a wedyn oedd gynnu nhw canoes a bob math o bethau yn y sailing club. Oedd nhw'n chwarae teg yn nhw, motorbus o bethau. Oedden nhw'n mynd â plant ni fatha, am dro i Puffin Island a mynd â nhw ar y canoes a bethau. Oedden nhw'n chwarae teg, oedden nhw'n helpful fel yna. Ac oedd y llonga mawr yn dod amser hynny, oedd chwaral, ac yna ni jeti mawr, ac yna longa mawr dod o Germany, Sweden, bob man i lawr fanna. Oedd y hogia mynd ar y canoe at y llong ma, am dyn fyny'r raffia. Wedyn nhw'n dod yn ôl efo oranges a fala, bob dim i ni. Am chwbl o gynnu ni wneud, te. A la môr, te trwy'r ha, bob dydd. Oedden ni'n lwcus iawn. Ond Ysgol Sul, y Band y Hope, oedd fatha youth club ni. Yn y Pantrafon ei hun, ddim yn Pemina lle o'n i'n byw, oedden ni'n dod i fanna, o gynna ni bandstand, ystalwm, ond o'na 2 gôr o Pema Mawr. Dyna lot o bobl yn perthyn i heini, 2 cwr cymysg, te. A nath 2 nhw'n ennill yn y Steddfod Genedlaethol. Dyn o'na rei yn dod o Talabont, Gonwy, ag o Gonwy hunain, i gyd wedyn wneud noson i ni, dyn oedden ni medru mynd yna i noson iddyn nhw i entertainio. Na hwnnw'n mynd ni ar amser ni am Band y Hope a Ysgol Sul, na be oedd i bywyd ni.
My family came here on my 3rd birthday. We lived in Errol Moor on Beach Road, which was next to Harvard. I always felt we had no money in my family at all. We lived in a flat, and then we were in a council flat from when I was 11. We probably had a little bit more money because my granddad came to live with us, and he'd been a manager of a cotton mill, and so he was getting a pension every week, and he'd give mum money out of that. So we probably had a little bit more spare. And I used to go and get his cigarettes for him as a kid, and then he'd give me the change, and I used to be able to get to the cinema that way as well. Went down the beach a lot, would walk along it, roller skate, go in the sea a lot during the summer. Cousins used to come during the summer holidays, and so our friends, my parents and their children. It was like a big playground, really. This was a touristy place, massively touristy. There were thousands in the summer coming here. It's completely different. There were camping sites everywhere. It was certain parts of the country at different times. I think Birmingham was first week in August, Leicester, Nottingham. And during that time, all the girls and the boys used to look for visitors to go out with. The other place I loved was Edie's Cafe, and they had a jukebox in. And John Travers, his dad owned the jukebox, I think, and he used to go and replace the records, and he was a friend. So I'd buy the records off him when he'd finished with them. And that was a way of buying records for 20p or 10p, something like that. And everybody used to gather there on a Saturday morning and listen to the jukebox, and you'd have one drink. And Edie was, she'd got a voice like a foghorn, but she had a heart of gold. So you could sit there all morning and perhaps spend, I don't know how many pence it was, just drinking coffee and chatting. So it was like having a youth club, really. It was a brilliant place to grow up in, basically, because we had everything, didn't we? We had sea, mountains, we had freedom, you know.
I was born on a farm in Dwygyfylchi called Tyddyn Du, Black Cottage, and they used to say, why is it called Black Cottage when it's whitewashed? Well, it's right under the rock of Trwyn y Wylfa, so all winter it's in the shade, so hence Tyddyn Du. And it goes back to something like 1600, but it was classed as a small holding, 20 acres. So only ever had maybe 6 milking cows to 8, and then sheep, pigs, but it was a proper mixed farm. And I grew up in that idyllic situation. The earliest recollection I have of the farm is really feeding the lambs that had lost their mothers and having fun with the haymaking and all that went on. And as time went on, I was maybe 8 or 9 and wanted to learn how to milk a cow. And that was sort of introduced to us about when we were 9. And then we were stuck with that for the rest of my time, milking 2 cows before going to school and straight home for the 4:30 milking. Tyddyn Du became our playground. We didn't really leave it. The farm was too small for me to stay and work with my father. And the theme was, go and get a trade, and then you can come back to the farm once you've got your trade and all. But by the time I finished my apprenticeship in 1966, the farming had practically disappeared. It was just sheep. So what was sustaining the farm was the camping. Camping had become really popular. So that really was the big earner for my mum and dad. And handy, the sheep would be up on the mountains in the summer, out of the way, and vice versa. The campers gone in the winter and the sheep would be back down. That worked all right. I didn't like the sheep side of farming as much as the other parts of it, because it was all or nothing with sheep. They were either grazing in the fields or you're actually handling every one of them. There was probably about 200 sheep, which wasn't a lot, but it was a lot when you were handling them, doing everything by hand, shearing and anything like that. Because we had the railway at the bottom of the fields, train spotting, steam train spotting became the thing, because we were either contained on the farm as a playground or down the bottom of the field to see the trains. And that changed me when I became historically minded at a very young age. It was because at the end of steam, I finished train spotting in 1962. Now I'd been a year in apprenticeship, and then you're becoming the later teenager. Cars, going out to dances or whatever, drinking, and the train spotting seemed old hat, didn't it? So that disappeared at the wrong time, really, because if I'd have carried on, I'd have realised the steam was going to decline and disappear very rapidly. I'd gone back to Nottingham to visit mother-in-law, as often we did, long weekends, that was our holidays. And I just happened to pass in this bookshop in 1968, September, and there was a magazine saying, last day photograph, Steam Swan Song, and I couldn't believe that that was it. Steam had finished. In less than a decade, what a massive change there'd been.
Pan o'n i'n canol yn y ngŵr, oedden ni'n mynd i pictures lots yn gyda'r nos, ond prawn Sadwrn oedd amser ni fynd i pictures, ac oedd o'n llawn hefyd. A plant gyd yn mynd yna. A'r Hen Davies ma'n bosio ni o gwmpas. Ond oedden ni'n mynd lot fawr pan oedden ni'n canlen o'n le'n byd arall i mynd. Ond y pictures. O'na ddynas yn byw hyd y stryd, Bonnie Mary, a John Tom oedd i gwri, a dwi'n meddwl bod o wedi cael rhywbeth yn yr hyfal. Oedd am dod iawn efo'i ffon ac yn mynd i hitio ni, oedden ni gyd ofn o. Wedyn o Twm Christmas a Merry Christmas yn byw lawr yn y gwylod. O'na lot o gymeriadau yna. Un peth arall oedden ni'n neud, o'na ddynas yn byw jyst o dana ni, Aunty Grace oedden ni'n galw, a ddim mynd â ni fyny mynydd efo picnic i hel llys. Bron bob dydd amser llys. Ond pethau bach, pleser, dim games a computers a pethau fel yna. A sôn am pethau fel yna, wrth gwrs. Ond pethau bach diniwad fel yna oedden ni yn neud.
I was born in Runcorn, but my father was from Penmaenmawr and he was a set maker till the war came, and then the quarry closed and he went into a chemical factory in Runcorn they were producing things for the war effort. And as soon as the war was over, we came back to Penmaenmawr. It was difficult to find somewhere to live after the war, and the quarry hadn't opened up immediately. So my brother and my mother and I went to live on Anglesey for 6 months, and then my father was living with his parents in Penmaenmawr while he was looking for a job. Eventually he found a place under the arcade. I don't suppose people realise that there's a basement area to the arcade, and underneath people lived there, and we had one of the flats. We used to take our lunch and go on our bikes down to the beach, and we'd have to be back for 5 o'clock for tea. There was a watchman keeping an eye out on the pier. We as children, we used to... we didn't make life pleasant for him, and we'd run him a merry dance, really, calling out "Cocky Watchman," and he'd come with his stick towards us, and we'd run, you know, and then call from the other part of the jetty. I don't know how we didn't have an accident, and we'd go under the jetty with ropes and swing above the sea when it was crashing onto the shore. And our parents didn't know a thing. There was an iron bridge over the railway. It was steam trains then. And we used to stand above the steam trains, and we'd be covered in smoke and steam, and we'd be breathing it in. But that was one of our little adventures.
Born in Penmaenmawr and brought up just under the quarry there, row cottages there. We did things we weren't supposed to do really when I was a boy, because the quarry wasn't working at the weekends, and me and my friends used to go, you know, playing in the quarry. It was all like adventure really. My parents didn't know where I was. That's how life was. You had to make your own entertainment. But my mother's family were known as Penmachnos. Now, when I was a boy, I thought my tide had come from Penmachno, but apparently he hadn't. My great-grandfather and great-grandmother, they did come here from Pemachno. They came here to work in the quarry. And then that name, Pemachno, stuck with the family. My mother's brothers and my mother, they were given the name of Pemachno. Although their surname was Davis, but they say my dad was known as Johnny Pemachno. But he'd never been there in his life. When I was about 10, I think, we moved to a council house which was in Dwygyfylchi, and we changed our denomination then because we had to get a bus then to Penmawr. My parents let me go to church because my friends went to Church of England or Church in Wales, you know. And that's how it was, you know, you made new friends. Although it was only a mile away, you were always separate from Dwygyfylchi children because they went to the junior school in Dwygyfylchi, or Capelillo as it's known, and I went to the junior school in Penmawr. And you didn't mix with them, you know. You didn't mix with the Penmawr children much. You stuck together like, I don't know why that was, but that. And then when you went to senior school, you came in contact again with them then, in senior school. And then you sort of renewed your friendship with them. Every year there was a summer carnival, and then we also used to have things on the beach, sports days, and like a fancy dress parade going through Penmawr. And when you were children, you got your mother dressed you up as something. I remember once winning first prize. My mother dressed me up as a tramp. Although I was in school, I had a job working in one of the shops, carrying orders out. You know, people would have their food delivered. The shop had a bike with a carrier on, and I'd go from school, the boss would give me a box, you know, and I'd deliver it. So I was earning money quite young, really, because it was only like 10 shilling a week, which, what's that now, 10 shillings? 50p, yeah. But it was money. There used to be a dance place in Llandudno called the Winter Gardens. Every Saturday night, it was a live band, and we used to go there. If you wanted to get home, you had to book your place on the bus, and if you left it too late, you had to walk home from Llandudno, which I've done that many times, many times.
My mother had an unusual name, Damaris. It's in the Bible, and it's a Greek name. And I often wondered how she got that name. Well, the truth was revealed to me one day. I just purchased the car. I took my parents for a spin. We went round Bethesda, Landsfrancon that way. And when we came back home, there was a car outside the house, and there were very few cars in the early 60s where we lived. And there were 3 people in the car. So I wonder who they are, you know, business, you know. Yeah. So I went in the house, and then the bell went on the door, and a little old lady in the door. One of them had been sitting in the car outside. She said, "Excuse me, I'm looking for a Damaris." She used to be Damaris Jones. That's my mother, I said. I'd like to see her, please. So I brought her into the parlour, right, into the posh house, and my mother came through. Our mother looked after her. "I'm nurse so-and-so," she said. "I brought you into the world in 1915. You were the first one that I brought into the world as a young nurse and midwife. And I've just wondered what happened to you, and I've forgotten your name. In fact," she said, "I gave you that name my mother was going to kill her because it'd been a rope from my mother's neck. Damaris. She couldn't say it as a child, she called herself Massey. And we found out that when my mother was born, the nurse was thanked for performing a wonderful birth. They said to this young nurse, what would you like? We would like to thank you. How can we thank you for what you've done, bringing this beautiful girl to the world? May I call her with one of my favourite names? And my grandmother said, yes, foolishly. She said, Damaris, and that was it, stuck. It found out that this lady, this nurse, was a deeply religious woman. And she knew her Bible back to front. But it's a name which everybody knew. So I wasn't Dennis Roberts, I was Hogyn Damaris, Damaris's boy. My father was Gŵr Damaris, Damaris's husband. He's never Griff Roberts. It was Damaris, yeah. So the name had a purpose as well. A name identifies you. It certainly did in my mother's case. Played lots of soccer, although it was difficult to play soccer in Penn because there isn't a flat field in Penn to play soccer on. There wasn't then. And our play field was called Cae Bach. There was no Cae left, there was no field left of it. It was just a stone, you know. And I still have a scar from that time there, from 1945, when I fell playing football in Cae Bach. From the age of 18 onwards, I played one or two games for Pall Mall Reserves. And because at the age of 20, I moved to start teaching in the Manchester area. So and then to Mid Wales. So I played for teams in that area and only came home to Penn to play football when I was needed. I'd come home for a weekend and there'd be a note, you're playing tomorrow, because the regular goalkeepers were injured or ill or whatever, you know. Well, there were at least 3-4 fish and chip shops in that, 3 in the town and 1 in St Gwyn's area. We had a favourite fish and chip shop in town. I won't say its name, but the lady, Mrs. So-and-so, she made great, wonderful chips. I didn't realise till a bit later that during the day, she spent the time washing bodies down before burial. And if I'd have known that at the time, I don't think I would have liked to eat the chips. I love walking. I walk these mountains. I know every inch of the hills behind here. Because they're fascinating. The hills above Pall Mall are full of history. So I can pass the walks there. They went along ancient tracks which went back to the Middle Ages and further. And there were things to be seen everywhere. There were the huts which belonged to the people who lived 700-800 years ago. And I was fascinated by them, mainly because nothing had been written about them. You know, they were a mystery, and I enjoyed delving into the story. Still don't know the answers, but I'm still interested, fascinated by the history. And then coming towards, further to the west above Pall Mall itself, you have the area of Meini Hirion. It was a fascinating area, and so much to be seen, so much to find.
We had to go walk to dinner, which was further along the road. It was like an old chapel where we used to have our dinner. And because I was only little, somebody had to hold my hand to take me along there. And she used to squeeze my hand. She was a bit nasty. And she used to tease me because I said fui instead of 3. And anyway, one day she let go of my hand, so I ran home. And then my dad brought me back in the afternoon, but I wasn't very happy.
I remember the teachers, and yes, Evelina Glyn Williams was one of them, and She had monitors for everything. She was a real character, and she taught music as well. She had shoe monitors, so we took off her shoes. One was a left hand and one was a right. So a child would take off her sort of walking shoes and put on her teaching shoes.
On a Friday afternoon, everybody would be in her class. About 40, 50 kids would be in her classroom. She had an amazing voice and used to tell stories. I loved those times. Friday afternoon was best in school, really, because it was always reading time. And when I was in Standard 5, I sat next to a boy called John Barton, and his parents had the shop in town that had all the magazines and comics. And so he'd have a pile of comics on his desk, and I used to have first choice of them.
Cymraeg oedd ar ei rhan fwyaf, ond wedyn os ni'n mynd i cael rain teachers, oedden nhw methu siarad Cymraeg. Miss Lloyd oedd ei henwi o Gonwy, o hi methu siarad Cymraeg. Wedyn bob tro oedden ni'n mynd i dosbarth hi, oedden ni'n siarad Saesneg.
I didn't know Welsh, but we learnt it through books. We didn't learn it by speaking. And the most of the language in the playground was actually English, strangely, although there was quite a lot of Welsh around as well. But that was quite easy to understand. You just grew up with it. And singing in Welsh, of course. And the prayers in Welsh every morning. Yeah, ain't hard. We said 3 prayers, 1 in English and 2 in Welsh. And then the Roman Catholics came in later because they had to go to the Roman Catholic Church to say their prayers before they came into school. And my best friend was Roman Catholic. She said they always felt awful, as though they'd been naughty coming to school late.
O'n am uniform gyda ni, yn byd just o dillad iawn. O'n a rein dod efo bratia, chi fatha ffedog ystalwm, dwi'n neud allan o sach. O'n a rein dod i fewn fela, ond o'n i ddim yn dod i fewn fela.
One of the nice things we did was listening to the radio. They had a big radio, I think that was quite new, and we'd listen to schools programmes. I think that was a Thursday morning, so that was quite nice. But it was just more interesting than having a teacher speaking at you. It was just a very different way of learning, really. And we loved the radio then anyway, absolutely loved it. Everybody sat around the radio.
O gadden ni'n cael needlework. Wel, difyr i fel te. Oedd o'n mor slow pethau. Wedyn, oedd i mond... Dydych ma'n wyth yna ni yn y dosbarth. Wedyn mae rhywun eisiau gwneud coban. Neu mae rhywun... Oedd hi'n concentrate just ar y ddynas o eisiau gwneud y coban. Wedi canu hims yna ni. Oedd ni'n gyfo just ista fanna ac oedd hi'n dysgu ni sydd i hemio a bethau fel yna chobl.
The headmaster was Frank Pierce. And if you did anything naughty, the girls or the boys, he would get the middle finger of his knuckle and pummel it into your arm.
Athrawes yn sgrechian wedyn a gwylian yn ni a'r hogia'n gael ei gyrru allan wedyn i'r corridor ac oedd 7 gwaith wedyn cos o'n nhw'n ei fwy o dŵr allan o fan. Eisiau dod nhw fewn yn ôl. Happy days. Siopa mae Estalwm. Mae pethau di nôl yna, siop fish yna, 2 siop gig yma. Battles yn gwerthu llyfrau, toys a bethau. Bobl bach yna. Ironmongers yma.
I never went anywhere to buy clothes at Paramount. I didn't know what Marks & Spencer's was. I never went to Marks & Spencer's for clothes, which I did later. With Johnny Owens at shops, dressed as Gents Outfitters. All my clothes were from there. My shoes came from Morton's. My mother used to work for Morton's across the road there. So shoes, clothes, underwear.
O bob peth yma genna ni. Siop gwerthu pysgod, bob math o siopa. O na 3 chemist yma. Mae'n edrych yn feddwl lle maen nhw gyd wedi mynd o'n.
Pembermowr, you know, there's quite a few big shops in Pembermowr. There was a firm called Irwin's. That was a grocer, greengrocer. And there was Star, where I worked. Sold everything, groceries.
They're all established here to catch this very important, not only quarry trade, but during the summer there was a very rich trade from tourists.
I can remember, actually, when Mark was a baby. My son's 61 now. But I can remember when Mark was a baby, on Saturday morning, you could be queuing outside the shop, the bread shop or the butcher's, to go in.
It was overloaded for a population of 4,000 people. It really was overloaded. I make you wonder how on earth did they make a living with just feeding 4,000 people, but they did.
I worked at Sandbrooks from the age of 12 because we lived next door to them, and at 12 the old man said, would you like to come and work? I think I got, I don't know, £1 a week for brushing the floor. I wasn't allowed to serve ice cream behind the counter until I was 14, but I worked every summer.
That was quite a famous place to us. It was a meeting place.
It was a beautiful whitewashed cafe. It had walls round it, ivy growing round it, gardens at the back. There was a covered area where people used to be able to have your afternoon tea. There was a pond in the middle with a fountain and goldfish in it and flowers around.
There were little games and slots things on the walls telling your fortune. You could put a penny or two in and it'd say how long you'd live and whether you'd have a good life.
They made their own ice cream. So if you were on a shift early in the morning, he'd make the ice cream and he might give you a bit to taste. It was amazing ice cream. I've never tasted anything like it since. There was a big ice cream cone about 4 feet high in, I don't know, plastic or alabaster, something like that. And children used to go up and lick it. One of the things that people remember fondly is at the end of the season, they'd give everybody a free ice cream. So all the children queued up for their free ice cream on the Sunday. And then there was a milkshake stuff at the back, upside down. Raspberry, strawberry, lime, vanilla, I think maybe a lemon or some pineapple. And the wasps used to come and they'd hover around the raspberry and the strawberry. I think, please don't ask for a raspberry. If there's about 6 wasps around it, you'd just hope if nobody would ask for a raspberry milkshake at that point. It was a fun place and did afternoon tea. It was very nice afternoon tea. If we had afternoon tea, we could have crisp sandwiches and ice cream. So that was perfect.
I've lived here for 50 years, though I'm not actually native to Llanfyddechan, but I did own the pavilion for 22 years. The guy who owned it from the wartime was a chap called Levi Pickering. I approached his wife to see if I could buy it because I knew it was up for sale, and she'd actually promised it to somebody else. And this chap, Jap, came to see me at my parents' pavilion in Pembermowr, and he said that I could have the place because his wife absolutely hated it. Because his wife hated the place, the day I said I would buy it, he just literally closed the doors. He didn't clear anything out or anything. So when I opened the doors 1st of January, it just stank of sour milk, and there was sugar basins on the tables all full of mice dirt, and it was absolutely revolting. It took me 3 months to get rid of the horrible smell and to paint it all up and make it all nice. I started off with 1 lady and ended up with 14 members of staff, so it was quite good in that period of time. The pavilion was actually a theatre, and they did summer shows. And one of the first stages that Hugh Lloyd ever went on was the pavilion. As a consequence, whenever he was acting round here at Theatre Clwyd or Venue Cymru, he would always come and visit us and have a chat with us. And my mother committed a terrible faux pas on one occasion because he was a doddery old man by then. He came in and he was buying ice cream, and my mother said, "And what would your daughter like?" And he said, "This is my wife." And she was absolutely beautiful and so young. It was incredible. But that was somebody who started their career on the stage at the Pavilion. But there also used to be a band of Pierrots that appeared there every summer for a good many years. And they were run by a chap called Frank Dyer. People come all the time telling you stories of, during these performances. Sometimes they used to do it outside on the green if it was really nice weather and that sort of thing. You don't realise just how even that would have involved the residents of the village, because there was a lady who was like a theatrical digs, and she had them every year. I think it took over then with the tea dances and all that sort of thing. Actually, the floor was all set up when I first had it. The floor was still set up with the lines and everything. And it is a really good floor for dancing. All those pavilions were all built by a firm called Ginger Lee of Longsight in Manchester, and they had a catalogue, and you could order the buildings from the catalogue, which seems absolutely incredible to think so many years ago you could do prefabricated buildings like that, but you could. When I came to buy it, I got a surveyor in to, check the property, and he was absolutely amazed at all the safety aspects to the building. Considering it's so old and they had no technology, it was, brilliantly built. My pavilion used to be a coach stop. When I first bought it, I used to have about 17, 18 coaches a day. Once the road came through, there was no point in them calling my place because they could get to their destination, Carnarvon and Anglesey, quite quickly, whereas in the past they'd been stuck in traffic all the way along and they were desperate for a cup of tea and desperate for a wee, and they would come in to me, and I did very well out of the morning coffees and afternoon teas. But then I had to rethink things. I had to start doing meals, and I bought a griddle, and I was doing all-day breakfasts and all the rest of it. My father used to call me the reluctant chef because I really didn't like it, but I had to get on with it. And I had a little shop as well in the place, so they used to sort of queue up, and while they were queuing up, they'd be looking at the shop. They'd have their tea and cake, go through, and then they'd go and buy, loads of things from the shop, which was fantastic. I think I feel obliged to say something about the music that I used to play there, which was definitely not my scene. It was beach sort of organ music, like I do like to be beside the seaside sort of thing. But my father absolutely adored this sort of music thing. And he brought me this tape, or a couple of tapes, from Blackpool. And I started playing them. And the number of people who would say, oh, I do like this music, you see. And so I would always say, oh, well, this is the one, give them the name and everything. I gave the information to so many people about these tapes that the company used to send me free ones. And it was described once as being the beachiest cafe in North Wales. It was recorded. There was a programme filmed. I don't know what it was in Welsh now, but it was Isn't Life a Pain in English. They booked the place for I don't know how many days and did this filming, which I thought was unbelievably boring. They just did repeat things over and over again, and people just sat about knitting, and it was awful. But yes, they said, it's the beachiest cafe we've seen along, along the coast. So there we are.
My Tide was a retired farmer. He used to work on the Carneddau farming, and he used to like to walk up there. He would take me and my brothers and his faithful sheepdog up there, and he used to tell us many stories about the wild ponies. We used to go collecting fool's gold and that from up by Llyn and Avon, and I thought it was real gold as such, but it's what they call the fool's gold. And he was my Tide that showed us what they call tickling for trout, picking the stones up from the river, and then you just grab the trout like that. Quite often, like many people before us, we used to go up to the sliding stone, which is in the childhood memory poem as well. It was just basically a rock that we used to slide down, but it was a fun tradition, and many people before us for hundreds of years have been doing it as well. It's just little memories like that you treasure, yeah. Glanamore Elias used to be the old rubbish tip for the village. And I can remember seeing the old, you know, the bin wagons going, and it was just piles and piles of rubbish and all the seagulls and that squawking. And today, people come into the village, they just see the beautiful nature reserve and all the wildlife. But back then it wasn't, it was an eyesore, you know. Going back all up the village and that, there was little shops. There was Shop Nell, I remember, up on Valley Road, and Penzance stores on top of Mill Road. But there were just shops dotted all the way up. You had the sweets in the jars where they used to weigh them out and that. But yes, all the chocolate bars of crisps and pop and things, and used to have the Corona bottles, fizzy pop bottles, and then we used to take them back and get, I think it was like 2.5 pence back for taking an empty. And what I do remember about the old shops as well is there'd always be a chair there, just so, I don't know, like I used to go in there with my 9 and then so she, you know, sit down and that, have a rest and that. Yeah, it's just happy memories. Where we lived on Mount Road, you've got Gorwell Estate now. Well, that was just fields back then. So all that was our playground, basically, and especially school holidays. You used to go off in the morning, come home when you were hungry and that, you'd be at the quarry or whatever, you know. And I used to remember the quarry wagons taking the workmen up, green canvas covered back lorries, and you could hear the sirens as well before they were blasting and things. We never went up the quarry when the sirens were going off, but when it was quieter and things, we used to go up from Tannagraig side where they weren't working on that side of the quarry. It was just what you did as kids, exploring and, you know, making dens and things like that, you know. As I was getting older and that, used to go with friends and that, used to, you know, hang around down on the beach and that, and used to be a lot of people that we didn't know, you know, obviously they were tourist visitors. And there used to be the Plas Heilog, top of Mount Road, youth hostel. And so we used to make friends with people that used to come over and stay there as kids. And, you know, as kids, you do make friends easier and things, yeah. We're in the middle of it, aren't we, you know, and opposite Anglesey and everything. So, and the views and the sunsets we get and everything, it's just perfect. I feel very lucky to be born here, to be honest.
Oedd 'na lot o blant yn y stryd, a ddoth 'na deulu o evacuees o Lundan i fyw yn un o'r tai, ac oedden ni gyd yn chwarae fyny yn y chwaral lle toddan ni ddim i fod i chwarae.
We played a great deal in the hoppers of the disused quarry hoppers, and Ifor Davies, the local archaeologist, had used one of the buildings there to build his model of the Carneddau, and we as children used to help him. Well, we thought we were helping, and we would stick pieces of sponge onto bits of wood, and they would be the trees and things.
A dwi'n cofio dynion yn mynd i fyny i'r chwaral a dod lawr yn y twllwch ac yn ei fel rhyw fath o dan yn ei dilo i dan y safari lawr.
The quarry originally was owned privately by the Derbyshire family. They were gentry, really. I can remember when I was a kid, Mr Derbyshire on a horse used to ride past our house, you know, and maybe his grandchildren on horses, you know. You know, we used to sit there with our mouths open watching, you know. In the days of the quarry, when the quarry was full, there were so many men with the same name, so they had to give them nicknames.
How they got their names were interesting. There's one chap who had worked on the railway all his life, and his wife was quite quite pleased that he went to work in an uniform. He was a porter or something, and she enjoyed polishing his buttons every morning for him to work and smarten himself up, collar and tie. He told us more money to be had in the quarry, so he said, I've got to work at the quarry. His wife was furious. Don't you come back with a nickname. I'll be careful, he said. Weeks he'd been there and nothing happened. Then one day, one of the men said, I'm giving Fred a nickname there. And he said proudly, you'll never catch me. Byth Dalby. And that was his nickname for his life. Byth Dalby. You'll never catch me.
There was one fella, and he used to help the blacksmith, and he was called Will Pick. And I thought it was because he worked with a pick. And I said to the blacksmith one day, I knew, why do they call him Will Pick? And he said to me, don't you know? Well, no, I said, I don't. He says, he's always bloody picking his nose, he said. They gave them, because that's how they were recognised, because there were so many called John Davies, John Roberts, John Jones. There were so many of them.
If you were lucky enough to pass the scholarship, as we called it, in the 1920s and 30s and before, you went to either Friars School in Bangor or to John Bright's, Llandudno, but mainly Friars School. And when you came from there, you went to the white-collar job. There weren't many white-collar jobs in this area at that time. There weren't huge banks of offices, as you do in cities. So the nearest job to a white-collar job was to work in the quarry offices in below the quarry. And it's called the Office of Hour, the big office. And it was quite an achievement to be employed there. You went to work in a suit, right? Collar and tie. Whereas my grandfather went in a blue, thick shirt, covered in dust by the time he came home.
I was only 15 and I worked in the quarry office. And there was a few hundred men working in the quarry then. And on Fridays, I and somebody else would go around with the wages. And when you think back, there was no, I was only 15, 16. There was no security. And I'd have a box, a wooden box like that. And all the cash, all the wages were in cash. And I'd go all over the quarry, dishing the wages out.
If you worked in the quarry office, you'd have made it. But not really, you hadn't, because my grandfather came home with more money than they did, because he worked such long hours. He was coming home with sometimes up to £8 or £9 a week, which was a fortune in the 1930s and 40s. Whereas the others would be about £3, £4 a week as a white-collar worker. He didn't achieve a good wage, as you might do today with a computer, etc. Your achievement was getting your hands dirty. And my grandfather had come home filthy, covered in oil, covered in dust. And I can see my grandmother now in the backyard with a huge tub, stuncho we call it, cleaning his filthy clothes and water coming out black.
You went, whether it was raining, snowing or what, didn't make any difference. And some of the men, they would have gone to work with, they'd put sacks over them, wrap sacks around their legs to keep their trousers dry, and sacks over their shoulders to protect themselves. And they worked like that, because if they didn't work, they didn't make any money. And at one time, I worked in an office halfway up the quarry. And, we had electric fires there, things like that. They were always on, But the men working outside, they didn't. The conditions they worked in was very hard, very hard.
My grandfather was a quarryman in Penmaenmawr, repairing wagons, etc. in the quarry. The wagons were the main transport for carrying stone down from the upper parts of the quarry, for the crushing plants, down to the road for lorries, down to the jetties for the sea transport. They were also a means of taking men to work, because everybody worked at least 1,000 feet above sea level. So in the morning you get men running to jump on the back of a wagon which was being pulled up empty while a full wagon came down, drawing the other one up, you see. So one morning he was a bit late for work. He didn't like travelling back of a wagon. It was just a little step we could jump on and held on for dear life. And as he ran for the wagon, 2 men got there before him. One of them turned around and, "Hard luck, Will. Till next time, Will," you know. And that the rope pulling the wagon up snapped. And I think I'm right in saying those 2 men were killed or badly injured. And it could have been my grandfather. And from that day on, that's the last time I went up in a quarry wagon. That finished him. He preferred to get up earlier and walk up the zigzag the paths which took him to his place of work.